Across the country, men are being hospitalised and even dying after using drugs to enhance sex. Despite this, it's being called a silent crisis. It's not being talked about, and the NHS hasn't gathered much data on it. It's called Chemsex, but why is so little known about it? I'm Lucy Watson, and this is What You Need to Know. Well, joining me for this quick briefing is ITV News' digital reporter, Sam Leader, who's been investigating this. We're also joined by Marc Svensson, social psychologist. And you've been working to provide more evidence of suicide and drug-related deaths within the LGBT plus community. Sam, I'll go to you. What is chemsex? I mean, by the very name, that makes me think chemical sex. Can you just explain it far better than me?
Yeah, it's got like a very complicated kind of history, I'd say, in terms of connotations with what chemsex is. But essentially, chemsex is the use of illegal drugs to enhance sex. But it is a very complicated and kind of nuanced issue.
Marc, who tends to use these chemsex drugs?
Yeah, so these drugs, I mean, as talked about in this investigation, are GHB and crystal meth primarily, to a certain extent other drugs as well. Chemsex users use them, but also many other people within our community and by all means in the general population. So people use them for enhancing sexual experiences, but people also use them recreationally in club environment, in bar environments, in socializing with friends. So drugs are used in many different contexts, but they can be extra problematic in certain contexts.
Now, as we've just said, you know, you've done an investigation into this, and I'm always quite fascinated by how a story comes across your path and why you choose to go with it and delve more deeply into it. So how did this happen?
Yeah, I mean, well, as a gay man, kind of living in London as well, which I would say is kind of the kind of epicenter, you could argue.
Yeah,
don't get me wrong, this goes far beyond London. But kind of friends of friends discussing these types of drugs, how they're addictive, how they've heard of people dying. And then one of the first people I came across was Marc. And we've probably spoken every day since, haven't we? Because it just kind of unraveled that no one was really talking about this, no one was really doing anything about this. We had these really deep conversations about how chemsex does have this image of being just about sex, and we just found that wasn't the case.
Why are they so dangerous then? I guess that's the crux of what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, GHB is dangerous because it's easy to overdose from it. So it's very small dosages, and you can easily, just a few milliliters can mean that you might fall asleep from it or pass out from it, and then you risk dying from suffocation, for example. So there's a high overdose risk with using GHB. Crystal meth is more dangerous because it's incredibly addictive, and it can have devastating consequences on your perception of reality. So you might end up in a psychosis.
And what did your investigation find there?
Well, I mean, to start with, which was really powerful and emotional, we spoke to the dad of a young man who were calling to hear. This, you know, young, openly gay man, came out of university, you know, super creative, his dad told me actually, and, you know, when he walked into a room, he was just, you know, lit up the room, his dad said. And he'd been getting help for, it was a kind of chemsex he'd engaged with as a teenager. He sought help throughout his life to kind of, so he dipped in and out of these drugs and got help just a couple of weeks before he died, but he'd gone to meet a man to engage in chemsex and use these drugs. And it just, the consequences were devastating. And he died at the age of 27. He was found in a home. He'd been laid there for 17 hours undiscovered.
Just left on the floor in a blanket. I feel like I let him down. It's not as a parent. It's not what you're meant to do. You're meant to protect them. You're meant to be there for them, and we couldn't be there for him. And feel a strong sense of failure.
I mean, it's incredibly moving hearing from him, and brave as well.
As you can hear there, actually, he goes on to say he's just been on this journey of really kind of trying to find out what this scene is, and we should be more compassionate towards people with addiction, because at the end of the day, this is an addiction, isn't it? And if you put it side by side with any other addiction, there's not many dissimilarities.
Mark, just how common are
Yeah, I
these
think
deaths?
that was originally when we started speaking, you and I, Sam, that was what we talked primarily about. Talking from my own experience as a gay man as well, living in London for over 20 years, I have seen so many deaths within the community from drugs and suicides, often using these drugs, especially in the last couple of years, which made me fund the organization that I am now running called You Are Loved. And our mission is to raise awareness around these deaths and address them and reduce them. So to answer your question about how common these deaths are, it's complex and we don't have a number. And it's one of the things that we are trying to do something about it, You Are Loved, in being able to evidence the number of GHB-related deaths. But there's complex, there are many reasons why it's difficult to get to the actual number of deaths that happens. But it has to do with funding towards testing for GHB on all kind of, when there is a drug-related suspected death, to test for GHB alongside all the other toxicology testing that is being done.
Sam, through doing this investigation, what is stopping people getting the help that they perhaps need?
I think it's awareness, and I think the main issue is obviously that we can't evidence, as Mark said, we can't evidence this issue, and if you can't evidence something which we know is happening...
So you've spoken to medical professionals about this?
Yeah, and that is one of the problems, is because, one of the hospitals that we went to, it's the busiest hospital, one of the busiest hospitals in the country, King's College in London, they had found that almost a third of their presentations at King's were from GHB or GBL and crystal meth. Now that's a big number, but
they're drug presentations, so people coming in essentially with illness, having a reaction to drugs.
Yeah.
A third?
A third, which is a big number when you think of one hospital. And the NHS code for specific drugs, which means they can track them, they can put money towards those issues. The NHS don't code for this specific drug, which means that you can't get the data to prove that this is happening. The reason King's have it is because one doctor has gone off her own back to find the data. But also then there's no money going towards the issue, which means it's kind of just going under the radar completely, and everyone's in the dark and no one's really acknowledging that this is a problem.
Yeah, and I feel like it's not being spoken about in the general population or across the population, but not either in the LGBTQ plus community as much as it should. I mean, I know personally in the last 2 years, I know of, not close friends, but I know of 18 people that have died from either a drug overdose or from suicide. And then that's in my wider kind of social circle.
But this is what I find, so Mark says that 18 people within, unfortunately I haven't, experienced the same thing, but that isn't an uncommon story. Someone said 5 in the last 6 months. Like, these are numbers that just get thrown about, but when you think about it, that's a big number.
They're staggering numbers. You're just two individuals who are just talking to me about it, and these are, excessive numbers.
Yeah.
Sam, you also spoke to Christian, who wasn't using these drugs for sex. Tell us more about them.
So Christian was just fascinating to speak to. They had gone through a really kind of difficult period in their life, and just being in closer proximity to these two substances just led them down that path. They started using more and more, particularly GHB, ended up in an induced coma. Christian's mum was holding their hand for 48 hours, not sure if they were going to wake up. And it kind of completely demonstrated what a lot of queer people would be experiencing.
I am so sick of opening a social media app to learn that young gay men are dying. When it's not affecting straight people, particularly straight white cis people, then it's sort of seen as an over there, that it's happening over there. Doesn't matter what circumstances, chemsex or just, like me, sitting there abusing it at home. More and more people are dying and nobody's talking about it.
So Christian kind of echoes the point that we were just talking about. It is such a broad issue, and it does feel like we're just kind of scratching the surface with this.
I mean, I read a little bit about it over the weekend, and I read one man's story, and he said his reason for using these drugs was to mask the shame and the guilt he felt growing up being gay. And I think I was quite staggered. I just thought, in the year 2025, is that still a thing? There is this shame and guilt.
I mean, yeah, I think this is the main issue. I'm a social psychologist, so I research sexual and minority identity and its relationship with mental health, with stress and resilience. And yes, in my point of view, this is the underlying main factor: stigma, shame, discrimination that still impacts our lives. And you must remember, someone who has these problems today, that maybe, let's say this man was 30 years old, they grew up. They were 10 years old 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, they lived in a very different social context. And to a certain extent, we're going backwards in many ways today. So stigma and shame associated with our sexualities, and especially with intimacy, with sex, with love, and how we express love between us as sexual minority men, I think is still very much stigmatized and shameful, and looked at from the wider population of a little bit of a taboo and dirty. And by extension, therefore, we internalize that, and we feel that way, and we take that out on each other. And stigma and shame, I think, runs like a red thread through many of our lives.
And with stigma and shame, that creates a barrier then to reaching out for this support. Sam, this isn't just a health issue either, isn't it? But a criminal justice one too. And you've been speaking to the Met. What have they said?
Yeah, as you say, there is also a crime perspective in all of this. Sadly, there are crimes that do take place, sexual offences and violent crimes as well. I mean, the Met found that in 2023 there were 380 crimes that they thought were in a Chemsex related context. But it's particularly, we talk about this kind of underestimation of deaths. I mean, the Met have been able to try and track this as best as they can. And they found that in 2023 that there were about 3 deaths in London alone a month, which is already a big number. But we have been told by the Met officially that they expect 2024's numbers to be the highest on record. So it does show that this is a problem that's here.
Or awareness is growing?
I think, yeah, it could possibly be awareness. And the Met would say that as well, that this could be that they are more aware of the issue, which is a good thing. But, we also contacted multiple police forces across the country in big cities, and they could give us nowhere near the amount of data that the Met gave us. So it makes you think, if the Met are telling us this isn't just a London problem, what is happening outside of London?
Where can anybody get advice or support?
Well-meaning charities. It's really difficult. Obviously, you've got local addiction services and doctors, and don't get me wrong, we're not trying to paint a bad picture. There are a lot of good people doing good work in this space, but it's that lack of acknowledgement from the government, for example. I mean, we went through a report which kind of highlighted the kind of quite severe harms of GHB back in 2020, and found that only one of the recommendations had actually been acted upon out of 8 recommendations, and that was 5 years ago. So it's if they're not going to do anything to tackle these problems, then I think it's going to be charities who are going to be the main kind of operators in this space.
If somebody is watching or listening to us talking about this, where would you advise them to reach out to?
Yeah, depending on what the issue is. I think if you are bereaving, if you lost a loved one to a drug-related death, then reach out to us at You Are Loved. We are launching bereavement peer support groups starting next month. So specifically for people who have lost a loved one who was gay, bi, queer, man to suicide or drug-related death. I would say if you are concerned about your own drug use, then there are several great charities that are doing that. Antidote, a London-based charity, is one, but there's also there is London Friend. We have Switchboard, which is an LGBTQ switchboard where you can call and get advice about any concerns you might have about loneliness, isolation.
And has there been, Sam, any response whatsoever from the government?
Yeah, so we went to kind of multiple departments, but as we said, this does span many different areas of politics. So the government said to us that they are empowering local authorities through public health grants to look at addiction issues, and will focus into areas particularly affecting LGBT plus people. We're yet to see what emerges of
What does that actually mean? Putting money into charities or helping? What does that actually
I think it's local addiction services, so being able to be able to go to a local addiction service and know that they can deal with a problem like DHB and crystal meth. We'll see how that kind of emerges over the next few months.
Sam and Mark, thank you both very, very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you can watch Sam's film After the High, Chemsex, Beyond the Myths on ITVX, and read more on our website at itv.com/news. If you're listening to this on a podcast platform or watching on YouTube, you'll find the direct links in the show notes. But until the next quick briefing, thank you very much for being with us.